Mortain, France. Dawn, August 7th, 1944. Hauptmann Werner Kolb spread the intelligence summary across the hood of his staff car, watching the pre-dawn darkness give way to grey morning light. His battalion, part of the 2nd SS Panzer Division, was positioned for Hitler's counteroffensive Operation Lüttich, the thrust that would cut American forces in two and reach the sea at Avranches. Kolb had read the briefing materials. He understood the objective. Drive west through Mortain, punch through the American 30th Infantry Division, restore the front. Simple enough. The Americans had been in France barely 2 months. His men were veterans of the Eastern Front, survivors of Kursk and Kharkov. They'd faced Soviet artillery parks that could turn entire grid squares into moonscapes. They knew what real firepower looked like. The intelligence officer's assessment of American artillery capabilities sat in Kolb's pocket. Adequate for defensive operations, limited coordination capability, reliant on air support for effectiveness. The analyst had noted American guns were of good quality, the M2 105mm howitzer particularly, but emphasized that American gunners lacked the training and tradition of German artillery. They compensate for skill with quantity, the report concluded. Their fire direction is slow. Their response times are measured in tens of minutes, not minutes. Kolb believed it. He'd seen captured American equipment, the standardized production, the emphasis on ease of manufacture over sophistication. Everything about American military doctrine spoke to an industrial approach, throwing resources at problems rather than solving them with tactical excellence. Their infantry was green, their tank tactics crude. Why would their artillery be different? If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The fog was thick that morning, perfect for the attack. Kolb could hear his panzers idling in the darkness, could smell the diesel exhaust mixing with morning mist. In 2 hours they would roll forward. American positions would crumble. The front would be restored. It was simply a matter of execution. He thought about the briefings he'd attended in the weeks before. The operations officer had walked them through American defensive doctrine, pointing out weaknesses. They lack flexibility, he'd said. Their command structure is rigid. By the time they recognize an attack and coordinate a response, we'll be through their lines and moving on the objective. Senior officers had nodded. The assessment matched their experience fighting Americans in Italy. Good equipment, poor tactical use, overwhelming resources, insufficient skill to employ them effectively. The German artillery doctrine was old, refined through 2 world wars and countless smaller conflicts. Fire missions were planned methodically, coordinates surveyed precisely, corrections calculated carefully. It took time, but it was accurate, devastatingly so. German gunners took pride in their craft, in placing shells exactly where they were needed with minimum expenditure of ammunition. Quality over quantity, precision over saturation. American artillery, from what German intelligence had gathered, worked differently. Their fire direction relied on simplified systems, on maps with grid overlays, on standardized procedures that any unit could employ. It was democratic, accessible, designed so even junior officers could call fire missions. The Germans found this approach suspicious. Artillery was a technical discipline requiring years of training, mathematical precision, and understanding of ballistics and meteorology. How could Americans possibly coordinate effective fire with such simplified methods? The intelligence summaries included reports from the Eastern Front, where captured American vehicles and equipment arrived as part of Lend-Lease to the Soviets. German analysts had examined Studebaker trucks, examined their construction. Built like farm equipment, one report noted. Simple, standardized, designed for ease of maintenance rather than performance. The implication was clear. American military production prioritized quantity and simplicity. Their weapons would reflect the same philosophy. Kolb had commanded artillery in Russia. He knew what massed fire could do, had seen entire German positions obliterated by Soviet artillery preparation fires that lasted hours, that expended ammunition by the thousands of tons. If the Americans had that capability, the intelligence reports would say so. But the reports emphasized American reliance on air support, on tactical air power rather than artillery. Their ground fire was adequate for defense. The summary said nothing to fundamentally alter German tactical planning. At 0100 hours, the 1st Panzers rolled forward. Kolb's battalion followed, advancing through the darkness toward American positions east of Mortain. The fog remained thick, visibility down to meters. Perfect conditions. American air power, their primary advantage, was grounded. This would be a ground fight, and in ground fighting, German tactical excellence would prevail. The lead tanks reported first contact at 0130, American positions at Saint-Barthélemy, a crossroads north of Mortain, small arms fire, some anti-tank rounds. The Panzers returned fire, grinding forward. Initial resistance was light, as expected. The Americans were being surprised, caught before they could organize proper defensive fires. Then the first artillery rounds landed. Not a few ranging shots, not a gradual build-up. Dozens of shells arriving simultaneously, bracketing the German advance with eruptions that turned the foggy darkness into flickering orange hell. Kolb heard it before he felt it, the distinctive multiple whoops of large-caliber impacts. Then the concussion, waves rolling over his position. His radio operator shouted something, the words lost in the noise. The fire continued. Not individual guns firing in sequence, not the methodical German pattern of ranging shot, correction, fire for effect. This was something else. Multiple batteries firing at once, the shells arriving in waves that overlapped, that gave no pause, no moment to recover. Kolb counted impacts. 20 shells in the first salvo. 30 seconds pause. Another 20 shells. The pattern continued. His lead company commander radioed. Taking heavy artillery fire. Multiple batteries. Request smoke. Kolb approved, but even as he did, he was calculating response times. The American fire had started within 3 minutes of first contact. 3 minutes. German artillery doctrine allowed for 10 minutes minimum response time for unplanned fires, longer if multiple batteries needed coordination. The Americans had put dozens of guns on target in the time it took to radio a situation report. The operations plan had allocated 6 hours to break through American positions around Mortain. By dawn, German armor was supposed to be driving west, American defenses shattered, but at 0300 hours, 2 hours into the attack, Kolb's battalion was still fighting at Saint-Barthélemy. American infantry positions that should have collapsed under armored assault were holding, and they were holding because every German concentration drew immediate artillery response. His company commanders reported the pattern. Form up for an assault. American artillery lands on the assembly area. Move armor forward. American artillery lands on the approach route. Attempt to outflank. American artillery lands on the flanking force. It was as if American forward observers could see through the fog, could track German movements and coordinate fire missions in real time. Kolb pulled out the intelligence summary again, read the assessment of American artillery response times, limited coordination capability. The words, now, seemed absurd. He was watching coordination that exceeded anything he'd seen in Russia, faster than German artillery could manage, certainly faster than the report had prepared him for. A runner arrived from the 2nd Company. Their commander was dead, killed by a direct hit from a 155 mm shell. THE Company had taken 30% casualties in 90 minutes, most from artillery. Their assault had stalled. They needed reinforcement or permission to withdraw. Kolb denied withdrawal. The operation continued. But he was beginning to understand that something fundamental had been misunderstood. American artillery wasn't slow, it wasn't uncoordinated, and it certainly wasn't adequate for defensive operations. By 0400 hours, the fog began lifting. Kolb expected this would help German forces, would allow better visibility for the assault. Instead, the first thing he saw, clearly, was the destruction. Knocked out panzers littered the approach routes, some still burning, their crews dead or wounded beside them. The fields around Saint-Barthélemy were cratered from artillery impacts, the hedgerows shattered His battalion had advanced barely 2 kilometers in 3 hours. Then the American aircraft arrived. Republic P-47, Thunderbolts, diving through the breaking clouds, rockets streaking toward German armor. And Kolb had known American air power would enter the battle once visibility improved. He had not anticipated the coordination. The fighter bombers struck exactly where German forces were concentrated, as if directed by observers who knew precisely where every German unit was positioned, which, of course, they were. The same forward observers calling in artillery fire were now directing airstrikes. The combination was murderous. Artillery kept German forces pinned, prevented them from dispersing. Then aircraft struck the concentrated targets. What artillery didn't destroy, the P-47s did. Kolb watched a platoon of Panthers try to reposition, saw American artillery land around them, saw the tanks forced to halt, saw fighter bombers roll in and turn the stationary armor into burning hulks in less than a minute. By 0600 hours, as full daylight arrived, Kolb understood the attack was failing. Not because of American infantry skill, not because of superior American armor, because of artillery, because every German tactical move was met within minutes by coordinated American fire that disrupted formations, killed officers, destroyed vehicles, and prevented the kind of concentrated assault that German doctrine required. The intelligence report had missed something fundamental. The Americans weren't using artillery the German way, with careful survey and methodical plotting and precise individual fire missions. They were using it like they used everything else, with industrial efficiency, with standardization, with systems designed for speed rather than precision. And it worked. It worked devastatingly well. Kolb's radio operator handed him a message from division headquarters. Continue attack. Reach of ranches by 1200 hours. The order was impossible. His battalion had lost 40% of its combat strength. The survivors were pinned down, unable to advance, without drawing immediate American artillery response. The attack had failed within 6 hours of starting. He looked at the intelligence summary one more time, at the assessment that had shaped his expectations. American artillery, adequate for defensive operations. Someone had been catastrophically wrong, and that error had cost Kolb's battalion its combat effectiveness in a single morning. The story of how German intelligence came to underestimate American artillery begins 2 years earlier in North Africa, where American forces first entered combat against the Wehrmacht. Those initial encounters shaped German perceptions, created assumptions that would persist through the Normandy campaign and beyond. Kasserine Pass, February 1943. The Americans' first major battle against German armor, and it was a disaster. Erwin Rommel's forces punched through American defensive positions, sent entire battalions into chaotic retreat. German after-action reports noted American inexperience, poor coordination, inadequate tank tactics. The Americans fought bravely, but poorly, the reports concluded. They had good equipment, but lacked the training to use it effectively. Those assessments weren't entirely wrong. American forces at Kasserine were green, poorly deployed, suffering from confused command structure and inadequate preparation. But the German analysts who wrote those reports focused on what went wrong for the Americans and missed what went right. Even at Kasserine, American artillery had performed well. When properly coordinated, when given clear targets, American guns had delivered effective fire. But this effectiveness was buried in reports emphasizing American tactical failures. The pattern continued through the North African and Italian campaigns. German intelligence reports documented American material superiority, noted the constant stream of new equipment, acknowledged that American forces were learning and improving, but the fundamental assessment remained. Americans compensate for lack of skill with overwhelming resources. Their tactics are crude but backed by industrial might. They will win through attrition, not through tactical excellence. This assessment contained truth, but it missed a crucial detail. American artillery doctrine had evolved rapidly since 1942, had incorporated lessons learned in North Africa and refined during the Italian campaign. By 1944, the U.S. Army had developed artillery procedures unlike anything else in World War II. Procedures German intelligence either didn't understand or didn't believe possible. The foundation of this system was simplification, where German artillery relied on complex survey, on precise mathematical calculations, on trained specialists who spent years mastering their craft. American artillery used a system called the graphical firing table, essentially a pre-computed tape that could be laid on a map between gun position and target. A battery commander could determine firing data in seconds, not minutes. Any officer with basic training could call fire missions. The system sacrificed some precision for enormous gains in speed. Fort Sill, Oklahoma, where American artillery officers trained, had become by 1943 a laboratory for fire coordination techniques. Instructors there developed methods for coordinating multiple batteries on single targets, for shifting fires rapidly, for massing fires from different units without lengthy preparation. These techniques would be called time on target, TOT, shoots, where shells from multiple batteries were calculated to land simultaneously, delivering a devastating shock effect before enemy forces could take cover. German artillery had no equivalent capability. German doctrine emphasized methodical fire planning, pre-registered defensive fires, carefully surveyed positions. It was effective, but it was slow, and it required extensive preparation. American TOT shoots could be executed with 10 minutes' notice, could bring shells from battalion, division, and corps artillery onto a single target, all impacting within seconds of each other. The intelligence summaries reaching German commanders in France in 1944 included nothing about TOT tactics. They mentioned American artillery's adequate range, noted the M2 105mm howitzers' good characteristics, acknowledged that Americans had plenty of ammunition, but they didn't explain how American forward observers could call fire missions that would bring dozens of guns to bear in minutes. They didn't describe the coordination systems that made this possible, and they certainly didn't convey what it felt like to be on the receiving end. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. German officers reading these reports in summer 1944 had reasons to believe them. The reports came from intelligence professionals, from analysts who'd been tracking American capabilities since North Africa. The reports incorporated data from multiple sources, captured documents, prisoner interrogations, frontline observations. They presented a consistent picture of American strengths and weaknesses, and they underestimated American artillery by approximately an order of magnitude. Part of this failure was institutional. German military doctrine had been refined over decades, had developed through 2 world wars and the campaigns in Poland, France, and Russia. It worked. German tactical methods, German coordination, German training produced consistent results. The idea that Americans, with 2 years of combat experience, could develop artillery procedures superior to German methods seemed implausible. But Americans weren't trying to copy German methods. They were solving different problems. German artillery was designed for deliberate operations, for carefully planned attacks and defenses where fire could be plotted in advance. American artillery was designed for fluidity, for rapid response, for situations where fire missions needed to be executed quickly without extensive preparation. The 2 systems served different doctrines and reflected different military cultures. The American approach also reflected industrial thinking. The graphical firing table, the simplified fire direction procedures, the standardized communications protocols. All of these were methods of mass production applied to artillery operations. Take complex tasks, break them into standardized components, train people to execute specific procedures rapidly rather than understand the entire system deeply. It was the same philosophy that allowed Americans to build Liberty ships in days and produce 100,000 trucks monthly. Apply industrial efficiency to warfare. German analysts looking at this system saw simplification and concluded it meant reduced capability. They were making the same error Hitler made with Liberty ship production, assuming that simple meant inferior, that standardization meant weakness, that anything built quickly and in quantity must necessarily be of low quality. They were wrong. the quality of American artillery ammunition was actually superior to German by 1944. While German factories increasingly relied on slave labor and POWs who had every reason to sabotage production, American ammunition was manufactured by skilled workers in well-equipped facilities. Dude rates for American shells were minimal. Quality control was rigorous. The ammunition worked consistently, reliably. But beyond ammunition quality, beyond the speed of fire direction, the most significant American advantage was coordination. American doctrine emphasized centralized fire control with decentralized execution. Any forward observer could request fires from any available battery. Battalion fires could be shifted to support adjacent units. Division artillery could be massed within minutes. Corps artillery could be brought to bear on targets of opportunity without requiring permissions up and down the chain of command. This coordination was enabled by radio networks that German forces couldn't match. By 1944, American divisions had extensive radio coverage, with forward observers in direct contact with fire direction centers, with battalion headquarters linked to division and corps, with the entire system designed for rapid information flow. German forces, constrained by shortages of both radios and fuel to power them, couldn't maintain similar communications density. The result was an artillery system that functioned less like German precision fire and more like American industrial production, rapid, responsive, flexible, capable of overwhelming volume when needed, but also capable of precision when required. And German intelligence, looking at American artillery through the lens of German doctrine, missed this entirely. Hauptmann Kolb, pinned down outside Mortain on August 7th, was experiencing the consequences of this intelligence failure. His battalion, his careful planning, his veteran soldiers, none of it mattered when American forward observers could bring dozens of guns to bear within minutes of detecting German movement. His training hadn't prepared him for this. His doctrine didn't account for it. The intelligence reports certainly hadn't warned him. By mid-morning on August 7th, as the attack on Mortain continued to stall, Kolb received new orders. Bypass strong points. Continue west. Speed is essential. Division headquarters was responding to the failure of the initial assault by emphasizing speed, trying to break through before American defenses could solidify further. But speed was impossible when every road was pre-registered by American artillery, when every approach drew fire within minutes. Kolb's second company attempted to advance along a secondary road, attempting to outflank American positions. They made it 300 meters before American artillery landed on the column. Not ranging shots, not a gradual build-up. Immediate, accurate fire from multiple batteries. The company commander reported 12 vehicles destroyed in the first minute, including 2 Panthers. The survivors went to ground. Third company tried advancing cross-country through fields and hedgerows where American observers would have difficulty tracking movement. They encountered mines, then American infantry, then artillery fire that seemed to know exactly where they were, despite the broken terrain providing cover. The company suffered 40% casualties before noon without reaching its objective. By 1300 hours, Kolb's battalion had effectively ceased to exist as a combat unit. Of the 600 men who'd begun the attack at 0100, fewer than 200 remained combat effective. The rest were dead, wounded, captured, or so disrupted they couldn't be reorganized for further action. Tank losses were similarly catastrophic. 22 of 30 Panzers destroyed or disabled, most by artillery fire or airstrikes directed by forward observers. The pattern repeated across the entire German front at Mortain. Elite SS Panzer divisions, veteran units from the Eastern Front, ground down not by American infantry, but by artillery. The 2nd SS Panzer Division, the 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte, the 1/16th Panzer Division, all stalled within kilometers of their start lines, unable to advance against American fire coordination. German commanders watching the attack collapse understood they were facing something they hadn't anticipated. Field Marshal Gunther von Klug, commanding Army Group B, received reports throughout August 7th detailing the failure. Each report emphasized the same factor. American artillery, devastating volume, impossible response times, coordination that exceeded anything previously encountered. Von Kluge had opposed Operation Lüttich from the start, had argued that German forces were insufficient for the task, that American strength was greater than Hitler acknowledged. But even von Kluge's pessimistic assessments had underestimated American artillery capability. He'd expected the attack to fail eventually. He hadn't expected it to fail in 12 hours. By nightfall, on August 7th, the German counteroffensive at Mortain had clearly failed. German forces held some territory taken in the initial assault, occupied parts of Mortain itself, but they'd reached none of their objectives. The road to Avranches remained firmly in American hands. The Atlantic coast remained 40 kilometers away. Might as well have been 400, given the combat power remaining to German forces. Hitler, receiving reports at his headquarters in East Prussia, refused to accept the failure. He ordered the attack renewed on August 8th. Von Kluge, knowing this was impossible, knowing his armor had been decimated, nevertheless transmitted the order. What remained of the SS Panzer divisions prepared for another assault. August 8th brought clear weather and renewed American air attacks. Any German movement drew immediate response, artillery or aircraft or both. The few gains made on August 7th evaporated as American forces counterattacked, supported by the same devastating fire coordination that had stopped the German assault. By August 9th, German forces were withdrawing from Mortain, having accomplished nothing except the loss of irreplaceable armor and trained personnel. The final casualty figures for Operation Lüttich revealed the scale of the disaster. German losses exceeded 90 tanks and assault guns, over 200 other vehicles, and approximately 6,000 casualties. For comparison, German forces inflicted perhaps 1,000 American casualties. The exchange ratio was catastrophic, but more significant than the numbers was what they represented. The complete failure of a major offensive operation, stopped primarily by artillery. Hauptmann Kolb survived the battle, but his battalion did not. By August 10th, fewer than 150 men remained from the 600 who'd begun the attack. The unit was withdrawn from combat, officially for rest and refit. In practice, it would never be rebuilt to effective strength. The losses, the equipment, the trained personnel, none could be replaced. Kolb spent 3 weeks writing letters to families, explaining how their sons and husbands had died, trying to find words that made sense of it. He never mentioned the intelligence report, the assessment that had called American artillery adequate for defensive operations. He didn't need to. Every officer who'd participated in Operation Lüttich understood what had happened. They'd been sent into battle with fundamentally wrong information about enemy capabilities. Not slightly wrong, categorically wrong. The kind of wrong that got men killed and missions failed. The intelligence failure at Mortain was not an isolated incident. Throughout the Normandy campaign and beyond, German assessments consistently underestimated American artillery effectiveness. Part of this was systematic. German intelligence focused on equipment characteristics rather than employment doctrine, on counting guns rather than understanding coordination systems. Part was cultural, the assumption that American speed and simplicity must mean reduced capability. But the deeper issue was the same problem Hitler faced with Liberty ship production, the same error that led him to dismiss American industrial output. German leadership at all levels struggled to accept that American methods, so different from German doctrine, could be superior. The idea violated assumptions about military excellence, about the importance of training and tradition, about what separated professional armies from industrial militaries. American artillery doctrine in 1944 represented something genuinely new in warfare. Not just better guns or more ammunition, though Americans had both, but a systematic approach to fire coordination that treated artillery as an integrated system rather than individual batteries, that used industrial methods, standardization, simplification, rapid response to create tactical effects German doctrine couldn't match. The graphical firing table eliminated complex calculations. The radio networks enabled instant coordination. The forward observer system put fire direction in the hands of officers at the point of contact. The willingness to expend ammunition freely gave American gunners permission to fire suppressive fires, harassment fires, fires of opportunity, without worrying about conservation. And the TOT tactics, bringing multiple batteries to bear simultaneously, created shock effects that German methodical fire could never achieve. German artillery, by comparison, remained rooted in World War I doctrines. Careful survey, precise plotting, methodical fire sequences. It was effective, but it was slow, and it required preparation. German gunners could achieve remarkable accuracy, but they couldn't match American response times. A German battery might need 15 minutes to shift fire to a new target. An American battery could do it in 3. The ammunition expenditure differences were staggering. American artillery in Normandy fired approximately 250,000 tons of shells per month. German artillery in the same theatre fired perhaps 30,000 tons. The 8-to-1 expenditure ratio reflected not just American abundance, but different tactical philosophies. German commanders, trained to conserve ammunition, fired carefully. American commanders, backed by unlimited logistics, fired liberally. This liberal expenditure troubled German officers who believed it indicated poor fire discipline, wasteful tactics, lack of skill. They were applying German standards to American practice and missing the point. American abundance made German conservation obsolete. Why fire 10 carefully aimed shells when you could fire 100 shells and guarantee target destruction? Why spend time plotting precise fires when you could simply saturate the target area? The industrial mindset extended to every aspect of American artillery employment. Guns were considered expendable. Barrels were replaced frequently, long before German equivalents would be. Ammunition was treated as infinite. Entire batteries could be repositioned rapidly because American units had sufficient vehicles to tow guns, sufficient fuel to move them, sufficient spare parts to maintain them. German artillery, increasingly constrained by fuel shortages and limited transport, became progressively less mobile. By late 1944, as Allied forces pushed into Germany itself, American artillery advantages had multiplied. German forces defending the Reich faced not just American abundance, but also improved coordination, better communications, and accumulated tactical expertise. American forward observers had 2 years of combat experience. American fire direction centers had refined their procedures through thousands of missions. American gunners knew their equipment intimately and could execute complex fire plans rapidly. The casualty statistics reflected this superiority. Studies conducted after the war analyzing American combat effectiveness found that artillery caused approximately 60% of German casualties in the European theater. Not small arms, not armor, not air power, artillery. The weapon system German intelligence had deemed adequate for defensive operations had become the primary killer on the Western Front. German military analysts examining these statistics after the war struggled to explain the disparity. How had American artillery, using simplified fire direction methods and standardized equipment, achieved such devastating effectiveness? The answer lay precisely in those characteristics German doctrine had dismissed as inferior. Simplification enabled speed, standardization enabled coordination, industrial abundance enabled tactical freedom. Fritz Battalion, commander of the Panzer Lehr Division, which had been decimated at Mortain, later wrote about American artillery with bitter respect. The American artillery was superb, he stated. It was the most effective arm of the American ground forces. Whenever we attempted to concentrate for attack, within minutes, American shells would land on us. Their forward observers must have been able to see everything. Their fire coordination was impossibly fast. We could not operate in the open. Battalion's assessment captured what German commanders learned through painful experience. American artillery had fundamentally changed the tactical environment. Traditional German tactics, concentration of force, rapid maneuver, aggressive attack, all became suicidal when American forward observers could bring devastating fire on any concentration within minutes. German forces were forced into dispersion, into small unit actions, into defensive postures where their tactical skill was negated by American material superiority. The psychological impact on German troops was significant, as soldiers who'd survived the Eastern Front, who'd faced Soviet artillery barrages lasting hours, reported that American artillery was more frightening, not because of raw tonnage, though Americans eventually exceeded even Soviet expenditure rates, but because of unpredictability. Soviet artillery followed patterns, massive preparations before attacks, defensive fires along predictable lines. American artillery could land anywhere, anytime, in response to any movement or concentration. German soldiers learned to fear American forward observers more than American infantry. The infantryman you could see, could fight, could potentially defeat. The forward observer was invisible, kilometers behind the lines, calling down fire with impunity. And once American artillery locked onto a target, the fire was relentless. Batteries would continue firing until forward observers confirmed target destruction, would adjust fires in real time, would pursue retreating forces with harassment fires. This relentless quality reflected American industrial warfare philosophy. Don't just defeat the enemy, overwhelm him. Don't just suppress the target, destroy it. Don't conserve ammunition, expend it freely because there's always more. This approach violated German military culture, which emphasized economy of force, efficiency, careful resource management. American abundance made German efficiency obsolete. The Mortain counteroffensive became a case study in how American artillery defeated German tactical excellence. Elite German units, well-trained, well-led, with good equipment and strong motivation, had been stopped cold primarily by artillery. Not because German plans were poor or execution was flawed, because American fire coordination simply didn't allow German tactics to function. Every German concentration drew fire. Every approach route was covered. Every assembly area was targeted. Forward observers tracked German movements and called fires that disrupted operations before they could develop. American infantry, backed by this artillery support, didn't need to be as skilled as German infantry. They just needed to hold positions and let artillery do the work. This realization spread through German ranks during late 1944. Officers writing situation reports consistently mentioned American artillery as the primary challenge, not American infantry skill, not American armor superiority, artillery, the weapon that didn't depend on individual courage or tactical brilliance, that simply delivered industrial-scale destruction through systematic coordination. German attempts to counter this advantage failed repeatedly. Counter-battery fire, traditional method of suppressing enemy artillery, became nearly impossible. American artillery positions were too numerous, too well defended, too mobile. German guns attempting counter-battery missions would immediately draw response fire from multiple American batteries, would be overwhelmed before they could achieve effect. The mathematical imbalance made counter-battery operations suicidal. German forces tried dispersing to avoid concentrated fires, but dispersion reduced combat power, made coordinated operations impossible. They tried moving at night when American forward observers couldn't see, but American artillery would fire harassing missions throughout the night, making movement dangerous, even in darkness. They tried rapid infiltration tactics, small units moving quickly through American lines, but even small concentrations drew artillery response. There was no tactical solution to a systemic advantage. American artillery superiority wasn't based on individual excellence that could be countered through better training or tactics. It was based on industrial capacity, communications networks, coordination systems, and ammunition abundance that Germany simply couldn't match. The war had become industrial, and industrial wars are won by the nation with greater industrial capacity. Albert Speer, Hitler's armaments minister, understood this better than most. In his post-war memoirs, he wrote extensively about Germany's material disadvantages, about fighting enemies who could outproduce Germany in every category. "We were fighting not just armies," Speer wrote, but entire economies. The Americans brought their factories to the battlefield. Their artillery was simply one manifestation of their industrial superiority. They could afford to fire 10 shells where we could fire 1. They could afford to replace losses immediately while we struggled to maintain strength. Speer had tried explaining this to Hitler repeatedly, had presented production figures showing the impossibility of matching Allied output. Hitler had dismissed the reports, just as he'd dismissed intelligence about Liberty ship production. The pattern was consistent. When reality contradicted ideology, ideology prevailed. German racial theories said Americans were incapable of effective organization. Therefore, reports of American organizational effectiveness must be false. This denial extended to artillery specifically. When intelligence reports began emphasizing American artillery superiority after Mortain, Hitler insisted German guns were superior in quality and that German gunners were better trained. Both statements were arguably true. German artillery pieces were excellent. German gunners were highly skilled. But neither factor mattered when Americans could bring 5 times as many guns to bear, could coordinate them 5 times faster, and could fire 10 times as much ammunition. The final irony of German artillery underestimation was that German forces possessed the technical knowledge to develop similar systems. German military engineering was sophisticated. German communications technology was advanced. German tactical thinking was innovative. Germany could have developed graphical firing tables, simplified fire direction procedures, integrated coordination systems, but German doctrine emphasized precision over speed, quality over quantity, expertise over simplification. The very values that made German military culture effective in previous wars became liabilities in industrial warfare. American artillery doctrine succeeded not despite its simplification, but because of it. By making artillery coordination accessible to any trained officer, Americans created a system that was resilient, flexible, and scalable. Lose a fire direction center, another unit could take over. Lose forward observers, replacements could be trained quickly. The system didn't depend on irreplaceable specialists or years of institutional knowledge. It was designed for mass employment, for industrial warfare, for a conflict where replacements and reinforcements would be continuous. German artillery, by contrast, depended on expertise that couldn't be quickly replaced. Trained surveyors, experienced battery commanders, skilled calculators. These specialists took years to develop. Once lost, they were effectively irreplaceable, given Germany's declining training capacity. By 1944, German artillery was declining in effectiveness, not because of equipment shortages, but because of personnel quality degradation. The Battle of Mortain, then, represented more than just a failed counteroffensive. It represented the collision between two military philosophies: German emphasis on tactical excellence versus American emphasis on systematic superiority, German focus on training and tradition versus American focus on procedure and abundance, German belief that quality defeats quantity versus American demonstration that sufficient quantity becomes its own quality. Hauptmann Kolb, writing his after-action report from a field hospital where he was recovering from wounds received during the withdrawal from Mortain, tried to capture what his battalion had experienced. He described the tactical situation, the American positions, the failure to achieve objectives, but the core of his report focused on artillery. American artillery coordination exceeds anything previously encountered. He wrote, "Response times are measured in minutes. Fire density is overwhelming. Countermeasures are ineffective. Current intelligence assessments are inadequate." That final sentence was the closest Kolb came to criticizing the intelligence summary that had called American artillery adequate for defensive operations. Professional courtesy prevented him from being more direct, but the implication was clear. German forces had gone into battle with fundamentally wrong information about enemy capabilities, and they'd paid for it with catastrophic losses. Kolb's report joined thousands of similar assessments filtering up through German command structure during late 1944. Report after report emphasized American artillery effectiveness, described devastating fire coordination, documented massive casualty rates from artillery. And report after report was filed away, noted, but fundamentally unable to change the strategic situation because Germany lacked the industrial capacity to match American artillery systems, even if German doctrine had been willing to adopt American methods. By December 1944, as German forces prepared for the Ardennes offensive, the Battle of the Bulge, intelligence assessments had been revised. American artillery was now described as highly effective and extremely responsive. The assessments noted American advantages in ammunition supply, communications, and coordination, but these revised assessments came too late to change German operational planning, came too late to prevent another catastrophic encounter with American firepower. The Ardennes offensive would demonstrate again what Mortain had shown. German tactical excellence couldn't overcome American systematic advantages. German forces would achieve surprise, would make significant initial gains, would demonstrate continued tactical competence, and American artillery would help stop them, would contribute to their defeat, would prove again that industrial warfare favored the nation with greater industrial capacity. The final casualty of German artillery underestimation wasn't any specific battle or unit. It was strategic understanding. By failing to recognize American artillery superiority until experiencing it in combat, German forces repeatedly entered battles unprepared for the firepower they would face. This pattern of underestimation, of dismissing American capability until proven wrong through bitter experience, cost German forces thousands of casualties and contributed significantly to the speed of Germany's defeat. If German intelligence had accurately assessed American artillery in 1943, if commanders like Kolb had gone into battle at Mortain, understanding what they would face, would it have changed anything? Probably not strategically. Germany was losing the war because of industrial imbalances far beyond artillery alone. But tactically, operationally, thousands of German soldiers might have survived battles they entered with false expectations about enemy capabilities. The intelligence officer who wrote the assessment, calling American artillery adequate for defensive operations, was probably a competent professional working with available information, applying German doctrinal understanding to evaluate enemy capabilities. He wasn't stupid or careless. He was looking at American artillery through German eyes, judging it by German standards, and missing what made it effective precisely because it was so different from German methods. This is the deepest lesson of German artillery underestimation, the danger of judging enemy capabilities by your own doctrinal assumptions. American artillery didn't work like German artillery. It didn't need to. It worked better. For American purposes, employed American advantages, reflected American military culture. And German intelligence, unable to recognize that different could mean superior, consistently underestimated it until experience proved them wrong. The men of Kolb's battalion, the thousands who died at Mortain and countless other battles, were victims not just of American firepower, but of German assumptions. They went into combat believing their training, their experience, their tactical skill would overcome American material advantages. They learned, often in the final moments of their lives, that industrial warfare had changed the equations, that American artillery, dismissed as adequate, was actually devastating, that the simplified systems German doctrine considered inferior were brutally effective. By the war's end, no German officer who'd faced American artillery still believed the early intelligence assessments. Experience had taught lessons that analysis had failed to convey. But those lessons came at a terrible cost, paid in German casualties, in failed operations, in battles lost not to American tactical superiority, but to American systematic advantages that German doctrine had refused to acknowledge until forced to by mathematical reality. The American artillery system that devastated German forces at Mortain continued operating through the war's end, refined and improved through experience, eventually helping to reduce German defensive positions throughout the Reich. The guns that German intelligence called adequate fired millions of shells, caused hundreds of thousands of casualties, contributed significantly to Allied victory. And they did so using methods German military culture considered inferior: simplified procedures, standardized equipment, abundant ammunition, industrial efficiency applied to warfare. This was the ultimate irony. German military excellence, honed through generations, refined through 2 world wars, rooted in tradition and professional expertise, was defeated by American industrial pragmatism, created in years, implemented rapidly, designed for mass production rather than perfection. The artillery that German intelligence underestimated because it was too simple, too standardized, too abundant, proved more effective than German artillery, precisely because of those characteristics. The colonel who allegedly called American artillery farm equipment may or may not have existed, but the sentiment was real, reflected throughout German intelligence assessments and officer opinions. American equipment looked crude compared to German precision. American methods seemed simple compared to German sophistication. And American abundance appeared wasteful compared to German efficiency. Every assessment was technically correct and strategically wrong. Because in industrial warfare, crude equipment that's abundant beats precise equipment that's scarce. Simple methods that can be rapidly executed beat sophisticated methods that require extensive preparation. And wasteful abundance beats careful efficiency when you have infinite supplies and your enemy doesn't. These were the lessons German forces learned at Mortain and relearned throughout the remainder of the war, lessons that contradicted everything German military culture believed about warfare, lessons paid for with catastrophic casualties. Hauptmann Werner Kolb survived the war, returned to Germany, lived into his 70s. In interviews conducted decades later, he rarely discussed Mortain specifically, spoke instead about the broader war, about lost comrades, about the futility of Germany's final years. But when asked about American military capability, about what surprised him most during the war, he always mentioned artillery. "We were not prepared," he said in one interview. "Our intelligence had told us one thing. Reality proved very different. American artillery was devastating. We had no answer to it." That simple acknowledgement, "we had no answer to it," captured the essence of German artillery underestimation. Not just that intelligence assessments were wrong, but that even recognizing the error, even understanding American advantages, German forces had no doctrinal, tactical, or material response. American artillery superiority was systemic, rooted in industrial capacity and organizational methods that Germany couldn't replicate. All German forces could do was endure it and try to survive. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.